You've been waiting all year for it, and here it comes. You're about to see the 2022 ChessKid Game of the Year. Of all the millions of kids playing chess around the world, this is the one that I picked. Oh yes, unlike chess.com, where we have a whole panel picking the best game, on ChessKid, I am the judge, the jury, the fun master. I picked this game. The vote was 1-0, and this was played by a girl who I had not heard of before this brilliancy was dropped on us. This is 12-year-old Miaoyi Lu, or it might be Lu Miaoyi, or it's probably some other pronunciation. So I apologize, but I'm not going to apologize about her play because it was awesome. How good is she? She's only 1 point away from 2,400. And you know what? There's only one other girl under the age of 14 that has been rated as high as her, and that would be Alice Lee. That's right, of Alice's Pawn Palace fame. But Alice, sorry, you're taking a back seat today. Let's take a look at the brilliancy here. And to start it out with Miaoyi Lu playing white, and it was a French defense. After knight c3, often we see this bishop come to the square b4, and then white can get really crazy by playing queen g4 and go after the pawn that's not defended. Now, funnily enough, black decided to play knight f6, and after the knight gets kicked, Miaoyi Lu plays queen g4 anyway. I've honestly never seen this move before with the bishop still at home. Now you might wonder, what's the queen going to do there with this bishop sitting on f8? Well, our hero today needs to find a way to distract the bishop. And in fact, after c5, then knight to b5 happened, which is consistent with queen g4. Because if we play knight d6, that knight is deep in the heart of Texas, or I should say China, or actually, I think this game was played in Serbia. But the point is, you can't let the knight stay there. The bishop's going to have to capture, and then the g7 pawn is going to be weak. Now, this whole plan probably should not work. I think black should probably just go ahead and capture and maybe distract the knight or the queen. But I understand why black played what she did. After the move knight to c6, knight to d6 was consistent, but black's plan was after bishop takes knight, I'm sure black saw that we'd have this in-between move, queen takes g7. But then when the rook saved itself, I'm sure black thought, well, when the bishop is captured, then I'm going to get a pretty devastating counterattack on white, because black played the move knight takes d4. And I've got to say, this position visually looks better for black. White has almost no development, and white seems like she's going to lose this pawn on d6. But for the moment, the pawn survives. It is kind of a wedge pawn, and it stops certain black pieces from moving to this square. Now, why is that important? Well, it turns out if this bishop ever marches his way all the way to the square h6, you're not going to be able to defend the rook with the move queen e7. That's called foreshadowing. So please stick around because you're going to see that happen in just a moment. Okay, now white played the amazing idea. Of course, bishop d3 is like super solid, right? But you're not going to make ChessKid Game of the Year by playing that move, even though it's perfectly fine. Instead, our young star plays the move knight f3. Here, kitty kitty, tempting black into capturing this pawn. Now, black could play solid with knight f5, but, well, black was sort of playing along with most exciting game, and black played knight takes c2. Okay, which the king has to slide over, no better choice for the king. And now the knight takes the rook. Okay, in for a penny, in for a rook, you know what they say. Now white has to go all out for an attack because white has sacrificed an entire rook. Now, I told you bishop to h6 was the big idea. So first, bishop to b5 happens. Now that the knight is pinned, now black has to act really quickly because bishop to h6, and there's just no way to stop queen takes rook. This knight is pinned on d7, and it's actually going to be a mate when the queen takes the rook. So you can't also be slow with the move a6 because then, although bishop to h6 could be answered by pawn takes, and the knight is now free to defend the rook, but now bishop to g5 would happen, and there's no good moves for black because if you play f6, I can just play rook to e1. Let's take a look at that line. f6 weakens the e-pawn, rook e1, and rook takes e6 is just game, set, match. And if the pawn moves, well, I get to play one of the prettiest moves. Knight takes. This knight is pinned to the king, and this pawn can't take because it's pinned to the queen, and uh-oh, I'm going to do some really bad discovered checks to you on the next turn. I don't think black can even survive 3 more moves in this position. So we need to go back. If f6 is not playable, what about the move queen to b6? Well, now the knight is pinned for one more move, and that gives white just enough time to shift the attack from this diagonal to this diagonal. It's pretty cool how there's 2 different diagonals in play. So white would just play queen f6. Oh, it's so pretty. It seems like a quiet move, right? We call it a quiet move because there's no checks or captures, but there's anything but quietness associated with this. Remember that movie, A Quiet Place? Wasn't that called that? Yeah, that was kind of a scary movie, actually. And here, queen to e7 is just going to be mate. And if you play queen takes pawn to guard the mate, then I just checkmate you on d8. And importantly, you cannot move your bishop anywhere in this position for your rook to assist in any way on the d8 square. So it's just mate in one. It is literally mate in one. There's not even a spite check coming up. So going back to this position, we see both dark square bishop moves are a problem. So black decided to play the move queen to b6 with the option of taking this pawn if, for example, this rook needs some protection, or taking the bishop if it becomes more important to unpin the knight. Very flexible move, queen to b6, probably the best defensive move. But then white takes advantage of the fact that for the moment, the queen is not touching e7, and white brings a new piece into the game, rook to e1. Now you cannot take the bishop, because if you do, rook takes e6, and this pawn, of course, is pinned. If the pawn takes, it is checkmate on e7. That's the power of the wedge pawn. It never got captured. You could, of course, not capture, but then I have arguably a prettier checkmate. For example, if the king moves over, it's the only other move. Then I'll play bishop to g5 check. And if you put your pawn in the way, I still checkmate you on the same square. We've already seen that. If you put your knight in the way, here comes that pretty move. Queen takes is the fastest mate. And I don't think I've ever seen a checkmate before in the history of chess where all of these pieces are bunched up so tightly. It's like she gathered all of the pieces in her 12-year-old hand and just put them near the black king, and it was an immediate checkmate. Kind of looks like a bug house position. Okay, so we need to go back. Rook to e1, queen takes bishop, not possible. So instead, the queen decided to capture the pawn, which makes sense. Now, rook takes e6 fails for multiple reasons. There is no pawn guarding e7, and of course, the queen can take back if needed. Okay, then we had bishop to g5. Bishop h6 doesn't really do a whole lot anymore because the queen can't really be removed from protection. And you can't win a little bit of material here because remember, you sacrifice an entire rook. And also, black has a million center pawns. You have to basically checkmate in order to win this game, and in order for me to make a video about it, okay? Now in this position, f6 doesn't really block the diagonal because I can just play bishop takes. Remember, this knight is pinned, and I don't think this is going to work out so well for black. So we need to go back and see what black did, which was b6. Okay, now b6, the idea is now black can develop the bishop and guard the d8 square. So if, for example, queen f6, which threatens mate, now, luckily for black, or not luckily, I'm sure it was in black's planning, the bishop can move, and everything is just barely being held together for the moment for black. So we need to go back. Instead, it's time to get a new piece in the game. The bishop is doing its best. This bishop is doing awesome. The queen is in the game. The rook is on the same file. You know what the hallmark of a great attacker is? Yeah, that's right. Get every piece to the party. Okay, her name's not Mikhail, but it is Miaoyi. Okay, so we're going to call her the Chinese Mikhail Tal. And she decided to get the knight in the game, and she played the brilliant knight e5. And here's the point. Now this bishop is glued to d7 to guard this knight. But wait a minute. After queen f6, we also need the bishop to move to get the rook to guard d8. That's what we call a catch-22. Or in this case, we're going to call it a catch c8. That's when you have no good options, okay? So yeah, knight to e5. Now, there was a diabolical move. If she had played this move, though, I would have literally fallen out of my chair. She could have actually played knight h4, which is an impossible move to find. But knight h4 is actually even stronger. And the idea is actually pretty simple. When I play the move knight f5, your pawn's going to be pinned. And it doesn't matter where you move your queen, rook takes e6 is going to be happening again. So for example, bishop b7, knight f5, and when you move your queen, rook takes e6, and we've already seen why this wins. When the pawn takes, it is still mate on e7. I don't have a pawn guarding my queen, but I've got two other helpers. Okay, anyway, knight e5 was certainly good enough, and maybe you would even think it's prettier. Okay, so we know the plan, queen f6, and you have no good moves. When you move the bishop, I can play bishop takes, and you've got to give me your queen just to stay alive. So black decided to play f6 to try to block the diagonal, but then the very simple bishop takes f6, okay, reopening the bishop's attack on the king. And now black played the move a6. I mean, it is a free move, but what else are you supposed to do? And a clinical finish here by the young superstar. The absolute best move was played, which is actually kind of hard to find. Knight f7. Now that opens up the rook's attack on e6, okay? And it also diverts the queen. If the queen moves anywhere, rook takes e6 is actually just mate, basically. Also, when the rook takes, which is really the only other move because you can't move your queen, then queen to g8 check, and because we moved the knight out of the way, when the rook moves back, now we have a double attack on the e6 square, so rook takes e6 is game over. I believe the game actually ended one move prior, but this is what would have happened after queen g8 check if the rook had blocked. And of course, it's just mate in a couple of moves in this position. Look at the final position though. Every single piece involved in the attack. The opening wasn't quite sound, but I'm totally going to give her a pass because once the attack got rolling, there was no stopping her. Miaoyi Lu, you have just played the ChessKid Game of the Year for 2022.